Hey everybody, and welcome to the Phunky Diabetic podcast with your host, Kate Tassie. The purpose of this podcast is to share the struggles, achievements, insights, and opinions of diabetics, their loved ones, and the medical professionals that provide them guidance and treatment. These episodes will feature stories that will inspire, dissuade, entertain, and educate. My hope is that with each episode, it will leave you with some degree of comfort, camaraderie, or empathy, whether or not diabetes has ever touched your life in any way thus far. You should know that none of the statements made within this podcast should be construed as medical or legal advice in any way. Any changes made to your diet or diabetes management should be made only after consulting with a medical professional. Now, without further ado, please enjoy the Phunky Diabetic podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Phunky Diabetic podcast. I'm your host, Kate Tassie, and it's my pleasure to welcome Jayne Jones, America's No Sugar Baker, to the podcast. So welcome.
Thank you. I like the name.
Thank you very much. I took it from a Tribe Called Quest song. And one of the members of the group rapped, "When's the last time you heard a Phunky Diabetic?" So I liked the rhyme and I took it.
Good. I kind of think I'm a funky diabetic, so that's good.
We should all be, right? So I was contacted by Jayne's publicist because Jayne just came out with a cookbook. For those of you looking on YouTube and seeing it on Jayne's screen, it's the Cookbook of Healthy Living and No Regrets. And you recently became a diabetic, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. But first, I wanted to do some lightning round questions. So what is the date of your diagnosis?
Oh, it's easy. It was my birthday. So August 16th, 2 years ago.
Okay. And excuse my question, but what was your age at the time of diagnosis?
45.
Okay. And do you know what your blood sugar was at the time?
Yeah, we talk about it quite honestly. I also mentioned it in the cookbook. So basically, at my time, my blood glucose level was 300 and 300 spilled into my urine. So it was about 600.
Wow. Okay. Mm-hmm. And obviously for anyone listening, we have some listeners in the UK. The US measures its blood sugar in terms of milligrams per deciliter as opposed to millimoles per liter. So what would you, I'm guessing that would be your highest blood sugar you've ever had?
Well, I wouldn't know that because I wouldn't know before that if I ever had something higher than the day that my husband dragged me to the emergency room. I was sick for about 2 weeks before that, and I thought it was just the flu.
Okay.
So I don't know during that time when I was sick, when I was vomiting profusely, if my blood sugar was higher than that or not. I gave up soda almost 12 months before that because I thought that I was having stomach issues because of drinking a lot of Diet Coke. But so when I was actually sick with the flu, I told my husband, I'm like, go get me a real Coke. So I was drinking, I actually drank probably 2 liters of Coke, downed it. So my guess is those nights, my blood sugar probably was really high.
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
And what has your lowest known blood sugar been so far?
Probably in the 70s.
Okay. How about your lowest and highest A1Cs?
Oh, my highest was when I first got diagnosed that I know of. When I first got diagnosed, it was around the 12s. And my lowest now is probably 5.8, 5.9.
Wow. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And what has been your favorite candy to treat a low?
Well, I don't do that.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm on absolutely no medicine. I have a completely sugar-free diet. I've been very cautious about my blood sugar, and I eat nuts or protein usually in very structured meals. So I don't have any lows and I don't have any highs.
Wow. I am jealous. Okay. So what is the biggest thing that diabetes has taught you so far?
About the importance of life. I think that's the most important thing. I lost my eyesight after I got diagnosed in August, my birthday. I was released from the emergency room and no one told me that my eyesight was going to go. So when my blood sugar was that high, I actually woke up the next day and wasn't able to see for about 3 weeks. And that feeling I never want to have back in my life again. And I think now I know the value of nutrition. I think I used to celebrate with food. And so now I don't see food as a celebration. I see food as nutrition and fuel in my body. And I really am very cautious of reading labels. If I get just a tiny bit of even natural sugar, I'm very sick. So I just have to, I think that the value of life is probably the most important thing.
Fantastic. That's a good lesson to learn. And obviously, you're rather newly diagnosed, but if you could give yourself a piece of advice to when you were first diagnosed, what would that be?
Oh gosh, I felt so much tremendous amount of guilt. So I basically spent from August to December, I basically didn't do anything in the kitchen. I threw everything in my kitchen away. I felt very guilty, and I shouldn't have. I mean, I think I do what everybody does. When you first get diagnosed, what's the very first thing you do? My husband did the same thing. I think my parents did it too, was you go on WebMD or go on the Google, type 2 diabetic, and try to figure out what the warning signs are and what the symptoms are. And the first thing you get is obesity. Right. So I had a major amount of guilt. What I didn't remember is that the ER physician actually asked me if diabetes ran in our family. I didn't know the answer to that. So my husband had to call my parents at the time. And they said, yes, it's both sides of the grandparents. And so the ER physician actually threw down her clipboard. She's like, oh, double whammy. There you have it. So I think that it's genetic. I think that it's lifestyle choices. And now I know the magic formula for my body is less than 20 carbohydrates a day. 30 to 40 minutes of exercise. And if I do that, then I'm going to be healthy and I'm going to be great. If I go away from that formula, then I'm going to be sick.
Okay. So you've touched a little bit about your diagnosis story already, but if you could just walk us through your husband took you to the hospital because you were feeling extremely sick at that point?
Oh, yeah. So I basically was on vacation and thought I had the flu before I went on vacation, which actually to a food and golf resort for a vacation, cooking school, because I used to love to cook. I still like to cook, now just a different way. And got sick every afternoon, and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. I was vomiting profusely and extremely tired, couldn't do anything, and basically got wheeled around in the DC airport for the first time in my entire life. Came back, fought it tooth and nail. My husband was my nurse, and he said, finally, he's like, I need to go golf. And I'm like, you can go golfing. Well, he left me for the very first time during that 4-week period where I was really sick and thought I had the flu. Well, he came back and he saw me over our kitchen sink throwing up, and he's like, how long has this been going on? I'm like, well, pretty much ever since you left. And that was about 5 hours ago. So he's like, that's it. You're going to the emergency room. I fought it tooth and nail. Even before we got to the emergency room, at the sidewalk leading up to the hospital, I said, I'm fine. I'm not going in. He's told me you're getting your butt in there and we're going to figure this out once and for all. And that's exactly what we did. I've 2 steps forward ever since then. I was sick for the first 3 weeks. I didn't have any sight. So I really hits as to where I was kind of shape I was in. But yeah, I just took the bull by the horns and figured out a way to do things and do life. And my family physician right away said, I have to put you on insulin. And I said, no, not a chance. And he's like, you have to go on insulin. I'm like, no, I'm not going on insulin. And so he told me if I wouldn't change my lifestyle, I'd be dead in 4 years.
Mm-hmm. And so when you first left the hospital, were you on just a pill form of treatment?
I was on metformin.
Okay.
When I first left the hospital, no, they didn't give me anything.
Okay. So
no meter, no nothing. She told me for the rest of your life, you need to eat lean meats and salads.
And that
was what I was told.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And whereabouts do you live?
I live in Florida.
Okay. So at what point, obviously you go home from the hospital and then very quickly after that you lose your vision?
Yeah, the next morning. I woke up, and I'm a lawyer, so I woke up and the very first thing I do is always look at messages, write emails and texts and get back on life. And well, I couldn't see my phone. I threw my phone at my husband and said, okay, great. Now we have to go get a new cell phone. He kind of looked at me funny. And then we turned on the TV because I watched the current events in the morning and I couldn't see the TV. And I'm like, and we have to go get a new TV. And he's like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't see anything. That's how we discovered that. And I have a client that does emergency room physician work. Mm-hmm. So I called him, that was a Friday, called him on a Saturday when I couldn't figure out what was going wrong with me. And it was a Labor Day weekend, actually. And he said, what's your glucose level? I'm like, I have no idea what my glucose level is. And he's like, you're not diabetic. I'm like, well, my husband went out at midnight, got a glucose level meter, and we watched it like a pregnancy test.
Mm-hmm. And what do you remember it being at that point?
Maybe 250.
Okay.
So it was going down, and that's why the vision was going.
Right. So at what point did you receive any kind of medical treatment or intervention?
Yeah, of course I did. Of course I did. Yeah. So he actually did a prescription for emergency dosage of metformin, which I started taking right away to get me through the weekend and then the holiday weekend. And then I got into a family physician on Wednesday or Thursday. And that's when I had the heart-to-heart conversation with a new family doctor who said, literally, if you don't change your lifestyle, you're dead in 4 years. So he put me on metformin to begin with. He said, I should put you on insulin. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I came back 30 days later and the glucose, I knew it because I was checking at that point, I was checking my blood levels probably 3 or 4 times a day. And basically I started working out, took a really, really strict diet. Again, I've watched what I ate, no sugar, and went off all medicine by December.
Wow. And so at what point after getting on the metformin, it was still a few weeks before your vision actually cleared, right? So was it just?
It was 3 to 4 weeks, probably long. The vision came back in 3 to 4 weeks, but it was very blurry still. And now if I actually get a little bit of sugar, even natural sugar in my diet that I don't know about, the vision is the first thing to go.
Okay.
So I struggle with that still.
And have you seen an ophthalmologist at this point?
I saw the ophthalmologist within the first week.
And did they say anything about retinopathy or it was?
Yeah. So I was inches away from 2 detached retinas.
Okay.
Not inches, minutes away from 2 detached retinas. So then he basically did, so at that point I did do a shot in each eye. And that he said for the next 12 months, you have to have a shot every single month. Well, I've only required 1 shot.
Okay, great. So it was it the Avastin injections or do you?
I have no idea.
Okay. Yeah. So that must have been, I too am an attorney and I have had about 30 something medical procedures in my eyes because of the retinopathy. So I certainly understand how scary it can be when you have your vision at risk or you can't see. And obviously being an attorney, it's quite difficult if you're vision impaired. So at that time, did you take some time off work, like medical leave or what?
Well, no, I work for myself.
Okay.
So basically my husband started dealing with it. We would just dictate to each other what I needed him to say back, messages, and getting work done. I mean, your life doesn't stop. So you need to figure it out.
Right. Did you have any court appearances at that time? What kind of law were you practicing?
No, I do grant writing and legislation.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, you decided, I believe your book says that during COVID, you decided to do the blog and that eventually led to the cookbook. So
that's a great story. So our daughter, who was a junior at the time, college, I kept posting pictures of stuff I was making. From January is the time I went back in the kitchen and started figuring out how to make things. My very first thing I made was the no sugar baker. Now it's not the no sugar baker, cheeseburger soup. I brought it over to my parents who live across the street and they started to cry. They're like, we've been waiting for this day since you ever got sick because your spirit and your funk is back, right? That Jayne we know is back. So basically she's over COVID, Emily came home from college and she said, I think you really should start a Facebook page that posts your pictures of what you've been making because people are really interested. And I'm like, I don't think so. And she's like, yeah, I think you should. So we started the No Sugar Baker then. And then I started into a blog where I really told a story. I really said, this is what happened to me. Now I'm back in the kitchen. I'm making great treats, great healthy meals. And now it's just over a year ago. And we're up to over 100,000 followers. I do about 5 interviews a week. And it's been absolutely fantastic. And I hear the most important thing is, it's a kind of a vulnerable story to go and tell exactly what happened to you and like what happens. And, it's you put yourself out there, so to speak.
Right.
But the best thing is I hear from tens of hundreds of people every day. Right. And everybody kind of has a very similar story.
Right.
So it's all good. If I can be a inspiration to others, then that it was the right vulnerability to do.
So what, did you use any resources to look into what the best diet for you would be? Any kind of nutrition books or?
No. And so in fact, I was referred to a nutrition counselor by my family physician. They never called me back. Okay. I called probably 3 times, never got a call back. So basically I did it on my own and tried to figure it out. And I really did. I mean, at my first physician appointment, he drew on the patient bed. the white paper on the patient bread. He drew out what my plate should look like and what I should do. And I knew at that point it was less than 50 carbohydrates a day. My blood sugar still wasn't dropping. So now I do eat less than 20 to 25 carbohydrates a day. So I know what it is, right? Everyone has that magic formula for their body. So I needed to figure it out. And I knew that I felt best when I was doing light exercise. So I knew I needed to get that back in my life. I actually gave up exercise right before I got sick, which is kind of fascinating. So I knew I needed to get that back in. I lost 60 pounds in that meantime too.
That's fantastic. So I noticed my mom and I did a couple of your recipes. So we did the white chicken chili and banana cupcakes with peanut butter frosting, and both delicious. But I was wondering, obviously you're abiding by a very strict number of carbohydrates or sugar. Are the recipes adaptable to, say, instead of cream cheese, light cream cheese, or?
Well, you have to be careful, right? You have to be very careful because you have to look at artificial flavoring and sugars when you use those light products, right? For instance, I can't have milk. I can only have heavy cream, or I can have unsweetened almond milk. So I use recipes that based on that. I also don't post anything about nutritional information in the recipes because there's so many different ways to do the recipes depending on the product that you choose to use, that I think that exact number is so important. But I encourage people to use nutritional apps that they can find online to fit the products that they're choosing to use. If you're using almond flour versus all-purpose flour, it's going to matter on that carbohydrate level. Also, what's going to matter too is your serving size, right? So for instance, I have in front of me the no sugar baker pecan pie cheesecake bar, right? Well, that's a pretty big piece.
Right.
Now, someone might say that's one serving. I wouldn't. I just have it cut that big so I show it every time we do interviews. Like, this is like one of the best recipes we got out there.
Yeah.
So basically that also matters too, is what size you make things, right? And so when I started posting nutritional information, my email box was full of people arguing with me about size of stuff. And it's like, you know what, that's not worth it for me. If you're going to make the recipes, that's great. Go and make them, do them your way that you need to do it for your body, but also have that much investment in yourself to download those nutritional apps that are out there like crazy, and they're free, and insert your own and get used to just doing that.
Right. Because as an example, my mom did that with the white chicken chili, and it seemed like I'm not sure what she said the serving size was, but whatever she determined the serving size was, it was like 50 grams of fat, about 30 something of it saturated. So I guess what you're saying, and I would probably agree, is that each person has a different way in which their nutrition is best served. And so if you're going to do a substitution, then maybe it would work for you, maybe it wouldn't work for others.
Right. I live on a very high fat diet.
Okay. Because
that's what folks do that are mostly very successful with this sort of lifestyle. It's a very high fat diet.
Okay. Where, this is just based on my ignorance, where did you get that point of reference or frame? Well,
I think it's pretty well known, but I also learned it from my family physician that's going to be okay. If I have a high fat diet, it's the carbohydrates and the sugar levels I have to be very cautious of.
Okay.
And you know what, to be honest with you, my cholesterol level has gone down. And my blood pressure has gone down too, so the below normal stages. So it seems to work for me. So again, I'm not a physician. You're not a physician. And so we have to be very careful of medical advice, but that was what my doctor said for me to do. And that's what works well.
Right. And do you think that the amount of fat that you were eating since your diagnosis was about the same, more or less, than you were consuming before you were diagnosed? Do you think you're eating that diet? Or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I think that question, because I know that like the American Diabetes Association says that they recommend 50 grams of carbohydrates a meal. Mm-hmm. Well, before I got sick, I wasn't eating 50 grams of carbohydrates a day. Mm-hmm. So I think, again, it is very specific. A body is your own body, right? You need to work the formula that works for you.
Right. And to be fair, a type 2 diabetic might be able to get away with certain things that a type 1 might not.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So what are your hopes for the future of this book and the future of the diabetic community?
For the book, I mean, obviously, I am going to continue on the blog. I think we're just getting started. I think that we're already working on cookbook number 2. The first cookbook has over 100 recipes in it. And we're not just talking about sweets and desserts. We're talking about, as you talked about, soups. We're talking about brunch items, and just to be able to make life better and really have folks to enjoy being able to eat and eat in a healthy way. Right. As far as, I think that 10% of the population is either pre-diabetic or diabetic, however you want to make the definition. And I think that if I can help just one person, then I'm doing the right thing.
Great. Yeah. And I noticed that your husband and your daughter were both involved, not only in encouraging you and in supporting you, but in the cookbook as well. Is that accurate? Oh,
our whole entire family. So I was on the blog. I referred to the parents as the folks. So my mom and dad are very obviously very involved in my life. And then our daughter, Emily, is she just graduated from college last week and graduated from the police academy. She's very active. She was a 2-sport college athlete and can probably eat anything she wants to eat. And then my husband is a former hockey coach. So a very active family. We're very involved, very close knit, and they're definitely part of the blog and part of where I share it all, so to speak, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so that's probably, I think, why folks really like the Facebook page and the social media, because they see it from a true perspective, the very authentic, real deal, right? Because I've lived it and I live it every single day. I know what it's like, and I'm not afraid to sugarcoat it, so to speak. I just go and say what I really believe and what's happened to me. And again, I mean, I've found myself, unfortunately, at restaurants and airports and got a little vegetable oil. And I know there's vegetable oil in there. Well, vegetable oil translates to carbohydrates, which translates to sugar. I've been on the airport floor having diarrhea at the age of 47. That's not a fun experience, right? But that's a real experience. I've had to rush to bathrooms many a time when I've gotten that, unfortunately, that raw sugar or just an ounce of maybe honey that I didn't know was in a recipe. So it matters. And, hey, I never thought in a million years. I've written 6 books now, 5 children's books, and a fictional tale. It was the 2013 USA Capital Book of the Book of the Year. I never knew a cookbook was going to be in my future. I never set out to do this, right? It was never on the game plan. But if that's the purpose of life, then you know what? Then so be it.
Yeah. And speaking of your social media and your blog, can you let people know how to find you on?
Yeah. So easy, so creative, so clever. It's www.nosugarbaker.com is the blog post, and you can search out all the recipes out there. You can go back to day 1 and read about the whole story. So that's www.nosugarbaker.com. And then, of course, we're on Facebook as No Sugar Baker, and I call us a team of 100,000.
Great. Well, thanks again for being on the podcast, and thank you for letting me check out the cookbook. Delicious. Again, I never knew about, is the ingredient Swerve? Is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had never heard of it before. So
Swerve works for me. So Swerve is an all natural sweetener. It's made out of root vegetables. It doesn't raise my blood glucose level at all. And the best part is it doesn't have that funky taste that some artificial sweeteners have that makes you want to gag after eating it. So this Swerve is actually what works for my body, right? And what I find is very good and easy to access. You can find that usually at your grocery store on the sugar aisle, or you find it on Amazon. Now you can also find the cookbook on our website, or you can go to Amazon. You can find it there too.
Great. Well, thanks again, and good luck in good health in the future. And I'll be keeping an eye out for volume 2.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of the day. Stay healthy, bake healthy.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to the Phunky Diabetic Podcast. Tune into future episodes by logging on to phunkydiabeticpodcast.com, and that's funky with a PH. On the website, you'll find links to follow the podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and can submit questions, comments, and suggestions for future topics. You'll also find links on the website that will enable you to listen to, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Remember, none of the opinions expressed in this episode should be construed as medical or legal advice. Please consult a medical professional before making any change to your diet or diabetic healthcare regimen. I hope you'll be well, stay safe, and keep listening to the Phunky Diabetic Podcast.